Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel. My Wife is Black Phoenix. Chapter 1. A glass of whiskey with ice, thanks. Outside the Xavier Youth School, in a bar. Lu Yan ordered a drink to the bartender in English. It's just that the drinks have just arrived, and I haven't had time to drink. But he has already felt the arrival of the uninvited guest. Turning his head again, he looked at the two guys who were gradually approaching behind him. Especially the young man sitting in a wheelchair. Lu Yan's face collapsed in an instant. Secretly screamed unlucky. "Bill, please." He hurriedly took out a dollar bill from his wallet and put it on the bar. He lowered the brim of his hat, turned his head and planned to leave. But this has just come to the door. But it has been stopped by someone. The man's hand fell on his shoulder, like iron tongs at this moment. Make him unable to move at all. "Hank, you let me go." Lu Yan snorted coldly. Seeing him in such an angry look, Hank quickly let go of his hand. At this moment, the wheelchair man stepped forward and looked at Lu Yan at the entrance of the bar and laughed again, saying, "Don't get excited, Lu Yan, you know, we won't hurt you. Don't want to get close to me, Xavier, you deceived me first, but don't show a victim expression at this time." Lu Yan felt more aggrieved when he thought of this. Shin said, "I am afraid that I will become the most aggrieved traverser in history." Yes, Lu Yan originally, not from this world. A week ago, he was only a recent high school graduate who had just finished the college entrance examination. Who would have thought that it hasn't been a long time since I received the admission notice from Tsinghua University. Another effort to awakening. I went straight through. It also traveled to a high school student in the 1990s, who was a civilian of the same name as his own. And this is not the most one. The most thing is that Lu Yan finally accepted his identity, prepared to make a girl in college, and then went to Silicon Valley to find Joe Buss, Gates and others to lie down and become the world's richest man. But after staying in this middle school for almost a week, he only realized that he seemed to have made a mistake in the timeline. This cheating traversal didn't allow me to travel to the real world of Malekin at all. It's in the parallel universe of X-Men and Marvel. The high school he attended was nothing else. It was founded by Professor X, Xavier Youth School. Listen to Lu Yan's questioning just now. Professor X and Beast, there was a little guilt on their faces at this time. Professor X took the initiative to turn to Lu Yan and apologized. "I'm really sorry, Lu Yan, because you are a rare non-mutant in our school. When you first enrolled in school, everyone was afraid of scaring you, so they chose to hide your identity from you for the time being." Quote. "Yeah, we did this for your own good." Beast Hank wanted to add something. But the words were only halfway through, and they were interrupted by Lu Yan. "Okay, don't give me this set, I know you are also kind, but now. Is it possible that I want to quit school, can't it? Drop out. Actually, Lu Yan, you have been here with us. You should also know that the students of Xavier School have no malicious intent towards you." Hank spoke next to him, wanting to make the final stay. No, you must drop out of school." Lu Yan shook his head like a rattle. It's not that he doesn't believe the students of Xavier School. But as an ordinary person, he really didn't have the guts to participate in Mutants' War. Especially the high-risk group of X-Men. In the movie, he saw the Xavier School explode more than once. The entire X-Men was almost killed in one go. In conclusion, there is no life for the protagonist, but it is best not to move towards the protagonist's side. Otherwise, there will be only cannon fodder waiting for you. Such a road, Lu Yan didn't want to. One day when he was in school, he suddenly died inexplicably. So leaving is a must. He is determined. Both Hank and Professor X looked at each other, both looks a little lonely. I thought that Lu Yan dropped out at this time because he did not agree with mutant. In Hank's mind, Invisible is a little bit more confused about mutants' future. Professor X, compare with him. It's more leadership temperament. At this time, I saw Lu Yan react like this. Although disappointed in my heart, he was not discouraged. Instead, he became more sure of his hopes. But after a moment of silence, he still said to Lu Yan. "Lu Yan, you want to quit school. This is your own freedom, and I can't stop it. But today, you are going back with me no matter what." Quote. Why? Lu Yan was puzzled. Professor X took a deep look at him, then said, "Because Chin, yes, didn't you feel the earthquake just now? Jin has a nightmare. The mood of the whole person is very unstable now. You as her best male friend. I hope you can go back to comfort her and stay at Xavier School for a few more days before leaving. This is our request to you, can it? Quote. When Professor X said this, looking at Lu Yan's gaze was also somewhat complicated. To be honest, he was before accepting Lu Yan's admission. I never thought that the opponent and Qin would spark sparks in such a short period of time. This speed is too fast. It's hard to come by, really confirmed, the old Oriental saying. Is this the destined marriage? Professor X thought so and looked at Lu Yan's gaze, which also became complicated. In fact, he is the only one who is complicated. Lu Yan was also speechless at this moment. At this time, I want to spit out this silly crossing again. When crossing, I didn't remind myself what kind of world it was. If he knew, he wouldn't rush into contact with Qin. But now, originally, I only wanted to talk about a scumbag love in the University of Millikan, which was ruthless, only entered the body, and did not enter the life. Why is it so good that I met Qin? I'm just an ordinary person, falling in love with the most unstable factor in this X-Men. Could it be that she was shocked to death on the spot by accident? Thinking, Lu Yan was instinctive, and his first reaction was to save his life. When he speaks, he must refuse Professor X's request to him. But when I really refused, I came to my lips. Lu Yan couldn't say it anymore. He thought of the lonely phoenix in the original book. Thinking of the kind girl who always likes to sit in the corner and holding a book in the past few days of getting along. Finally, he still relented, sighed. He raised his head again, and said to Professor X, "All right, I will go to see the piano. However, the conditions for my leaving Xavier School remain the same." Professor X listened and nodded. "No problem, Qin's mood is not stable now, otherwise, I won't bother you." Finish saying this, led Lu Yan towards the car outside the bar. Beast Hank followed. Listen to what Lu Yan said. "I feel a little unhappy in my heart." Then he added another sentence. Asked. "Lu Yan, for the piano, don't you want to stay in this school? Or do you hate mutants so much?" Lu Yan turned his head and glanced at Beast Hank behind his eyes. "Seriously, don't get me wrong, I never hate mutant, I just don't agree with your idea of running a school. Don't agree with the school's philosophy. Yes, through teaching, it is indeed possible to constrain part of mutant very well, but it is impossible for mutant and humans to achieve true peaceful coexistence. So not only do I want to leave this school, if I had ability, I would also leave with the piano." Quote. Lu Yan spoke his own opinion without any evasiveness. The two people next to him were taken aback when they heard the news. I didn't expect that at this moment Lu Yan chose to leave. The reason behind it turned out to be because of this. And after a moment of astonishment, it was still Professor X, with a ridicule at this time, and smiled towards Lu Yan. "Fortunately you don't have this kind of ability, Lu Yan." "Yeah, after all, I'm just an ordinary person." Lu Yan shrugged, not paying attention to Professor X's ridicule, and asked in a smooth manner. "By the way, I just forgot to ask." On Qin's side, there was a sudden emotional riot. What was it? It wasn't my departure, right? I haven't told Qin about this. Quote. It's really not. We checked before, and it seems to be related to an earthquake in Egypt. Professor X replied smoothly on the way back with him. Egypt earthquake. Why does this sound so familiar? X-Men. Apocalypse's storyline. Lu Yan was taken aback. But at this moment, he hasn't waited for him to ask again. Suddenly a crisp system reminder sounded in my head. Stare. The main storyline of the test, the God-level selection system is officially launched. System startup progress 10%, 20%, 30%. System startup progress is 100%. Congratulations to the host, the God-level selection system has started. Lu Yan looked back again, his face couldn't help but flashed over with a look of ecstasy. That's right, the system should be attached to the traversal. How can you hang everything without a system? How can you live in this Marvel world where the poor rely on mutation and the rich rely on technology? The God-level selection system, although it doesn't sound like it, what a one-click practice full-level system, came very happily. But it seems pretty good too. Lu Yan thought happily. But this joy did not last long. As he waited left and right, he didn't wait until the following, but he couldn't help panicking again. It's not a system, don't you have any newbie spree? I see other people's online novels have this kind of thing, and it comes up every second. Sorry, beep, this system does not provide novice gift packages. All income must be through the host's own choice. I wipe, what do you mean by this? Doesn't that mean that my system is almost inactive at the moment? Listening to the system, Lu Yan was stunned again. For a while, I felt like a roller coaster, but I felt depressed again. And his expression fell on the side, Professor X and Hank's eyes. It was misunderstood by them. I thought he was worried about the situation on Chin's side. Then he stretched out his hand and patted him on the shoulder, then calmed up. It's okay, Lu Yan, on your side, the most dangerous time has passed. Then you just have to go and comfort you. Yes, the nightmare period has passed, and the piano at the moment is just lacking a person to accompany him. You know, because of her ability. She is too lonely now. Even in our mutant school, there are no friends. Quote. The two spoke one after another. When it comes to Chin, their partner is full of worries. Their words also pulled Lu Yan back from his thoughts. After thinking about it, I decided to put the system aside first. Focus on studying the situation over there. After all, how do you say, the other party is now his own girlfriend? People are now in panic. How can I ignore it? ... Thinking about it, wait until the car in Hanko stops at Xavier School. He got off the car the first time and ran towards the bedroom where Chin was. Push the door open at this time. Chin was hugging the bedding and curled up in the corner of the bed. Trembling. Although he didn't have nightmares, his face was pale and his head was full of cold sweat. It seems to be extremely weak. ... Jin, how are you feeling now? Is it better? Seeing her look like this, good friend Hank couldn't help asking worriedly. But at the moment, watching everyone come in, Chin's attention is not on Hank's body at all. His eyes passed the crowd this time, but instead fell to Lu Yan behind the two. Seeing him approaching, the eyes that were originally horrified immediately lit up. Lu Yan, you are finally here. She opened her mouth and let out an exclamation. The whole person returned to the nest like a swallow. It actually flew into Lu Yan's arms. Seeing this scene, Professor X and Hank beside him couldn't help but sigh with emotion. I feel that Chin is really going to be planted in the hands of this Chinese kid. This sense of dependence is too strong. Hope she this time. Don't be inhumane. Thinking about this, the two turned their heads. Looking at Lu Yan again, his eyes are a bit complicated. I don't know how far a love between mutant and ordinary people can go. At this moment, Lu Yan didn't have time to pay attention to what everyone was thinking. Because at the moment Chin embraced him, Lu Yan was stunned. Because with her hug, Lu Yan suddenly saw the top of Chin's head, and 3 options popped out. 3 choices from Chin. Option 1, break free from Chin's embrace, and tell the other party that he is about to leave. Reward agent skill lurking technique. Choose 2, comfort Chin, and leave quietly afterwards. Reward elite foreign language proficiency. Choose 3, comfort the piano, and kiss each other. Tell her that he will always be by her side. Reward a random item from the heavens. ... This is a god-level option. The magic option system that I activated before. Has it finally started completely? Lu Yan looked at these options. The first reaction in my heart was naturally excitement. However, after seeing the content of the options clearly, I couldn't help but cursed inwardly. What kind of cheating option is this? The first option. Needless to say, it is definitely not a choice. Professor X and Beast Hank have gone so far as to invite themselves back, just to appease Chin. Being a scumbag in person, even if he is not shaken to death by the exposed piano energy, I am afraid he will be beaten by Hank and others behind him. As for the second option, although it sounds good, the rewards are too rubbish. He is now proficient in English and Chinese, and he can eat almost all over the world. There is no need to master other words temporarily. After all, this is Marvel's world, so the top priority is not to come over and learn foreign language knowledge. Still should improve one's own strength. Thinking of this, his gaze was natural, and he fell on the last option. I can only choose this one. The high-level skills drawn from the super-dimensional. Although it is random, it shouldn't be too bad, right? But at least it will give him a huge secret hole card in this troubled world. It's about kissing in public. It's done. I kissed my girlfriend, what happened? Not breaking the law. Thinking about it, Lu Yan turned his mind and looked at the piano in his arms, and he couldn't help but say. He lowered his head and kissed directly. Double lip fit. Lu Yan instantly felt a fragrance of Chu Zi. Don't say it, it feels pretty cool. And he was refreshed, and everyone next to him was instantly sluggish. Yeah, Lu Yan. At this moment, Phoenix's body trembled. Obviously he was taken aback by Lu Yan's bold move. But after a while, he returned to his senses, and his body softened again. Since it is the one I like. Kisses, it doesn't seem to be a big deal, right? Phoenix thought, and immediately hugged Lu Yan tightly. Very jerky, and began to response played with each other. Hongxia gradually climbed onto her cheeks. Ahem, I said yes, after all we are still there. Professor X and Hank waited by the side for 10 minutes. Seeing the two of them, there was never the slightest intention to stop. Finally couldn't hold back, she interrupted them by opening aside. What, it is also this time. Phoenix, it was only then that I realized what I had just done. His face flushed immediately and he hid behind Lu Yan. Young people now. Fortunately, Professor X is enlightened enough. Seeing the reflection of the two of them, they just shook their heads and smiled. Did not say more. Turning his head, with Hank, he took the initiative to leave the room. As for Lu Yan, while dark and cool, the system prompt sounded in his head again. Beep, congratulations to the host for your successful selection. Because it is the first time to really use this system, some bonuses have been increased. The lucky draw for the heavens starts. When the voice fell, time seemed to stand still. Immediately afterwards, in front of him, there appeared a huge lottery roulette that only he could see. The roulette Kerala keeps spinning. Lu Yan saw various treasures, circulating in front of her own eyes. In the end, Guanghua settled down. The reminder sounded again. Beep. Congratulations to the host, the lucky draw was successful, and you got the pirate world item a lot of fruits. Heavy fruits. In the anime, One Piece, a kind of devil fruit, the former owner is the admiral, Fujitora smiles, can generate gravity waves, and can manipulate the strength and direction of gravity at will. Including gravity, lateral gravity, no gravity, anti-gravity, pressure, tension, repulsion, gravitation. Plenty of fruits. Isn't this going to be posted? Lu Yan was overjoyed at first, but then frowned. Thought of a crucial question. I remember this thing seems to be afraid of seawater. If I take it, will it also become a duck? In addition, this thing does not seem to have a good taste. Can you change the taste? Ding. The item skills of other dimensions will be modified by the system after getting this dimension. As for the seawater and seafloor stone restrictions, the host does not have to worry, the seawater of the non-pirate world has little restraint. In addition, this fruit ability has been directly introduced into the host when it was extracted, so there is no need to take it. But please don't be too happy for the host. Fruit ability still needs to be developed by the host itself. The system cannot directly fill you up. The system explained. That's enough. Lu Yan is excited. This is the ability that Admiral Fujitora smiled. Even if there is no other way, just as powerful as Fujitora smile. But with it, Lu Yan at least, in a short time, don't have to worry about his safety. Thinking like this, he bowed his head and let out a sigh of relief. The look was a lot lighter than before. And all of this, but the Chin he was holding in his arms at the moment, watching silently. Seeing her boyfriend, her mood suddenly changed. Chin was naturally curious too, and couldn't help asking again. What happened, Lu Yan? How do I feel that your whole person is suddenly relieved? Yes, Chin, I think of our bright future, and I am happy about it. Lu Yan grinned and smiled brightly. The original intention was to make Chin happy. But never thought, these words were exported. The look in Chin's eyes at this moment was darkened again. Future. Mutant, in this world, is there really a future? Since the Sentry incident, Magneto has almost murdered the president in front of people all over the world. Mutant was pushed to the opposite of many people. This point, although Professor X has never mentioned it in school. But Chin knew everything in his heart. So deep down in her heart, she is pessimistic about mutants' future and her own future. Sometimes, because of my mutant identity, I feel inferior. So she has always been isolated by classmates because she can't control the powerful ability. Similarly, it is also alienating everyone intentionally or unintentionally. I thought that I would be alone forever. But I really didn't expect that I would fall in love with a non-mutant somehow. Only, the relationship between humans and mutant. Will there really be good results? Will he be afraid of my identity as mutant? Girls in love are inherently prone to gains and losses. Because of the growing environment, Chin has been more sensitive since he was a child. So at this moment, Chin lowered his head, holding Lu Yan's arms, and couldn't help but force up slightly. Although Lu Yan does not know how to read minds. But at this moment, I feel the changes in the girl's body in her arms. I also vaguely guessed what she was thinking. No matter how low my head is, my heart will inevitably hurt. Just got the joy of fruitful fruits. It was also in invisible, which was diluted a lot. What a fool, he murmured. Follow the little hand holding the piano. Under her worried gaze, but not in this room, continue to stay. Instead, she took her initiative to the school. The two held hands, just like ordinary couples. On this campus, they started to stroll. Walk like this. Although Lu Yan has been looking for topics to make her happy. I hope the open environment outside can soothe her mood. But at this moment, Chin still seemed a little worried. Lu Yan, my mutant identity. Take a deep breath. Can't tell how many attempts it was after. On Chin's side, finally plucked up the courage. Want to showdown towards Lu Yan. The kind-hearted Chin, although he is very reluctant to leave Lu Yan in his heart, but for his safety in the future, he still wants to say his own danger. But at this moment, the words came to the lips. Haven't really said it yet. But it was interrupted by Lu Yan. Okay, Chin, I know what you have to say. Isn't it mutant's identity? Mutant is also human. Don't worry, I will not have any psychological grievances because of this. Quote. Chin heard this, naturally overjoyed in his heart. But after that, a touch of loneliness flashed across his eyes. He lowered his head and said melancholy, but I am not the same as ordinary mutant. I'm dangerous. No one who comes into contact with me will have good luck. Silly boy, it's not your fault. That is your friend, not strong enough. There is an old saying in China that the dragon does not live with the snake. You are the fire phoenix destined to soar into the sky. Ordinary people, naturally, cannot be company with Phoenix. Quote. Lu Yan smiled and continued to comfort. Chin listened here, but it looked like a cat with fried hair. The eyes were filled with tears in an instant. Looking at Lu Yan pitifully, but I don't want to be a phoenix, I just want to be an ordinary person. I just want to stay by your side. Lu Yan, can you not leave me? Quote. Chin said. The hand tightly grabbed Lu Yan's clothes corner. Unwilling to let go. What Omega level ability? What has the most potential, the most powerful mutant in the future? Chin didn't know about these, or in other words, didn't have the slightest interest at all. She just wants to be with Lu Yan now. But his own powerful ability. Destined to be like a quill with thorns. A little carelessness will stab Lu Yan, who is still an ordinary person. This is the source of her pain right now. Lu Yan watched Phoenix's reaction. First it was startled. Then he returned to his senses and realized that Phoenix was afraid that he had misunderstood what he meant. Naturally, he quickly explained, what do you think, silly girl, I won't leave you. But, what did you just say about Phoenix? You can't be with ordinary people, you can't even be friends. The piano squatted like a child who had lost a candy. Seeing this, Lu Yan stretched out his hand and rubbed the little head of the piano again. What a fool. I didn't say, I'm just an ordinary person. Chin was stunned, and he didn't realize what Lu Yan meant. Seeing her bewildered, Lu Yan sighed. I didn't expect that the first time I used fruit ability, it was not used to defend against enemies. But this is also good. If it can dispel the worries of this silly girl in one fell swoop. It's better than killing a few. Comes more important. Look up, silly girl. Thinking about it, he raised his right hand and suddenly opened his right palm to the lake on the Xavier campus. Xavier School, monitoring room. Both Hank and Professor X are here. At this moment, he raised his head and looked at the couple walking slowly on the screen. The eyes in his eyes were a little bit embarrassed. On Hank's side, when he spoke again, he asked a similar question to that of the piano on the screen. Professor, you said, will the love between humans and mutant have good results? Should. Yes. Professor X answered vaguely. The expression also looked a bit lonely. Obviously, it was Lu Yan and Chin, the situation between the two. Give back some bad memories. He thought of Mora. Looking at Professor X's situation, Hank was also silent. He thought of Mystique. It's ridiculous that the X-Men at this stage have a tendency to become emotionally trapped. But after a moment of struggle, Hank regained his senses, and finally lowered his voice and said, after this incident, let's find a way to let Lu Yan leave the piano. Anyway, doesn't he want to leave Xavier School too, just so he can go far? Do you want to break them up abruptly? Professor X asked rhetorically. Hank was angry, patted the table and said, how can it be said that it is dismantling? I hope they can get together for 100 years than anyone else. Professor X, what did you just say this for? Hank said helplessly, Professor, what is going on right now, don't you know? Although we all like Lu Yan, it is undeniable that he is just an ordinary person. He is with Chin, there may be life-threatening. This danger not only comes from humans, but also from our terrifying mutant compatriots. Lu Yan, he, will become the weakness of Chin. Quote. Professor X, if he is he ready to sacrifice for Chin? Then you can't let them be together. At that time, Lu Yan will encounter unexpected events, and Chin may be crazy. Hank solemnly. His words silenced Professor X. In fact, there is no need for Hank to say about these things, Professor X is equally aware of these things. It's just that, deep down, I don't agree with this approach. But no matter how much I disagree. But I have to admit it. This seems to be the only feasible way at the moment. For the piano, but also for Lu Yan. No matter what, he shouldn't involve an ordinary person in the mutant storm again. Maybe I was at Xavier and it was a mistake to join ordinary people rashly. Professor X thought with a headache. But at this time, he has already settled his attention. After this incident, for Lu Yan's safety, let him forget all this. As an ordinary person, he should live the life of an ordinary person. Well, just like Mora. Professor X, whispering in his own mind. Ability subconsciously released. Following that, Lu Yan's voice sounded. ... The dragon does not live with the snake, because you are a phoenix, and the phoenix will not accompany ordinary people at will. ... Did he realize this himself? That way, that's fine. Professor X smiled wryly. I thought that next, Lu Yan was going to break up with Chin. I didn't expect it. Next, he would say these things unexpectedly. ... What a silly girl, who told you, I'm just an ordinary person? Okay, girl. ... Huh, what does he mean? Professor X is also a little confused. He raised his head and looked into the field. I saw Lu Yan standing by the lake, raising his right hand and opening it slightly. The originally calm lake. At this time, following his movements, a ripple suddenly appeared. Wow, the water is surging. In the sky above the lake, countless big hands appeared out of thin air. At this time, grabbing the water flow below, turning into a water column. Towards the mid-air, frantically surging away. This is, water control ability. Lu Yan, also awakening the ability, he is also a mutant. Watching this sudden scene, everyone was shocked. Hank's surprised roar first, but as soon as the voice fell, Professor X next to him shook his head and denied it. No, it's not right, this is not the ability of water control, but the control of gravity. Gravity, control. Hank froze for a moment, but he didn't react. But Professor X didn't explain much. At this time, his eyes fell on Lu Yan's body again in the video. There was shock, there was joy, and even more doubts. It's really weird. Before this guy, when he was just entering school, he didn't find any mutant's blood. Why did he? Professor X and others were puzzled. Lu Yan's attention at the moment is entirely on the large water ball in the middle of the lake. I began to realize my ability with my heart. This was the first time that he truly felt the changes brought to him by many fruits. With the use of fruit ability. Looking at the ordinary space on all sides, it looks like it has become a quagmire, and it looks like a net made up of countless thin lines. And his ability is to be able to toggle or even change the trajectory of these thin lines. He looked at the huge water ball slowly floating in the lake. That is the power of gravity. He threw a gravitational ball above the lake just now. And what he can do right now. Obviously more than this. Thinking about it, he flipped his right hand slightly and suddenly waved on the court. Plenty of fruits and repulsion. With this wave of his hand. The water polo that was just gathered by his gravity. At this time, like an arrow from the string, it took up nearly half of the lake's water. Wow, the water is surging. Go straight to the sky. While the water polo is flying, it is still getting bigger. Like a big star. Finally, after breaking through the clouds. Out of control, burst into bursts. Accompanied by a bang. The gloomy night seemed to have been blasted through a gap. Immediately afterwards, there was a heavy rain, dripping down. The whole Xavier school fell over. Lu Yan stood in the rain and took a deep breath. His face was somewhat pale. After all, it was the first time to use ability, he felt jerky, and his physical energy was too much, which was normal. But compared to fatigue after physical exertion. At this time, he was more excited. I glanced at the system panel that I could only see. His control of this fruitful ability is actually only 5% on the panel. Is the power of 5% so great? If it reaches 100%. Lu Yan thought about it. Fujitora smiled and pulled the meteorite, hitting the scene heavily. I don't know if I was in Marvel and copied this scene. What do others think when they see it? Thinking about it, Lu Yan licked his dry lips, showing a playful and expectant look on his face. Here he is looking forward to it. The piano next to him was completely frightened and dumbfounded. After a while, he was holding Lu Yan and couldn't help but startled roar again. Ah, Lu Yan, how did you do it? You said this. Lu Yan pointed to the raindrops on his head. Gravity. Lu Yan didn't hide it either. He spoke at this moment and gave the answer directly. Gravity. And listen to what he said. On the face of Qin, doubts arose again. Just about to speak again. Suddenly an untimely voice came from behind him. Shunzui took the stubbornly. To be precise, on Lu Yan's side, awakening should be gravity. He has the ability to control gravity. Am I right, Lu Yan? Lu Yan turned his head. Hank pushed Professor X, then walked out of the dark. Looking at Lu Yan's expression again, it was shocked. Especially Professor X, looking at Lu Yan again. Full of exploration and curiosity. It's like discovering a rare treasure. Ah, Professor, why are you here? Qin was a little surprised to see Professor X suddenly appear. However, Lu Yan had long expected Professor X to spy on him in secret. So there was no surprise for his appearance at this time. He also laughed when he asked, and then nodded openly. It's really good. In fact, what I can control here is not only gravity, but also repulsion. Now that they have revealed their ability, Lu Yan also knows that if he wants to keep a low profile, the possibility is almost zero. So at this time simply high profile to the end. When he opened his mouth, he said his ability characteristics very calmly. Sure enough, the words came out. The Professor X on the other side also had their spirits in an instant. Turning his head to look at Lu Yan again, with some curiosity, he said, repulsion. What kind of ability is that? Lu Yan laughed. Hearing the news, there was no explanation. Instead, he raised his hands flat, and used the ability that was fruitful again. The moment he moves, a wave of invisible air seemed to sweep in all directions. In an instant, within a small area of his circle center. The raindrops that originally fell from the sky suddenly stopped. Then under his control, drop by drop, like an arrow from the string. Immediately afterwards, he flew upside down in the air again. This ability is so cool. Qin surprised roar again next to him. The haze or melancholy in the original eyes has long been wiped out. At this moment, he raised his head again and looked at Lu Yan's gaze, full of joy. In fact, she didn't dare to be interested in what exactly this ability did. At this moment, I just thought. Lu Yan after awakening ability is also mutant, and can finally stay together with him. And compared with the girl's mind at this time in Chin, Professor X and Beast Hank obviously need to consider more. At this time, after briefly experiencing the magic of Lu Yan's ability, the excitement on their faces grew stronger. Beast took the initiative to speak, and said to Lu Yan again, "You have a very strong ability. After more training, it will be used in actual combat in the future, and it will be very powerful." Beast spoke, and wanted to mention Lu Yan as the person who came over. Lu Yan looked at his solemn expression, but suddenly smiled again, and said, "How about it, do you want to try it?" "Huh, you want to fight me, now? Why, can't it?" Lu Yan asked back. Beast Hank was taken aback, but he didn't expect that Lu Yan would make such an invitation. He turned his head subconsciously and looked at Professor X next to him. Professor X was obviously stunned by what Lu Yan said. After looking up and down Lu Yan, after thinking about it, he finally nodded. "Obviously, I also want to see, where is the limit of Lu Yan's ability, which has just been awakening." All of them looked probing. Only Chin was very worried at this time. Hearing that Lu Yan was about to fight Hank, he couldn't help but worry. "Lu Yan, it's so good, why did you suddenly think of fighting Hank?" "It's better after a while, Lu Yan. After all, you have just recently awakening ability, Hank is very strong." Quote, "Don't worry, your man is not weak." Lu Yan smiled and soothed, and motioned to Chin that he was okay. As for the real reason for the fight, he didn't tell Chin. "That's when I just had a conversation with Hank." New options followed in his head. The system starts again. Curious from Beast Hank. 1. Explain the principle of fruitfulness in detail toward him, and reward elite anti-reconnaissance technique. 2. You are not a beauty, ignoring Hank's curiosity, reward a can of Coca-Cola. 3. Real men shouldn't beat too much, have a fight with Hank. Use practice to tell him how strong fruitful is. Reward heavy fruits proficiency plus 5%. 3 options similar to the previous ones popped up over Hank's head. What elite anti-reconnaissance technique, Coca-Cola? Lu Yan glanced casually, he chose without hesitation, and chose the last item. This is where the match was made. It's just that these things are not good for him, and he said clearly to Beast Hank in front of him. On the opposite side of Hank, after getting permission from Professor X, the warfare in his eyes also surged out. Although he didn't say much verbally, it was obvious that he didn't hesitation about Lu Yan's decision to choose himself as the target of practice at this moment, and he felt a little uncomfortable in his heart. Step forward, his body doubled. Beast directly turned into a blue monster. Then he looked at Lu Yan and said solemnly, "Little devil, if you want to be a hero in front of Chin, you have found the wrong one." "Hope so." Lu Yan laughed. The voice was not over, accompanied by a roar of the beast. Opposite Hank, who was beasted, stepped on both feet. It actually broke the blue bricks directly on the ground. Following a leg sweep, towards Lu Yan's location, lacing came. Whoosh whoosh. Immediately I heard a series of tearing air sounds. These broken bricks, under the control of Hank's strength, were as fast as an arrow from the string. "Be careful, Lu Yan." Chin hides behind Lu Yan, watching this scene. I subconsciously want to use my ability to help Lu Yan tide over the difficulties. But at this moment, she hasn't waited for her to act. It has been stopped by Professor X. "Jin, calm down, just learn from each other." "But Professor, Lu Yan just got awakening ability." "It's okay, don't worry, Chin, Hank will be able to take action here." The professor smiled and comforted. As the two of them said, they didn't think that Lu Yan would win at this moment. Without him, after all, Hank is compared to Lu Yan. In terms of combat experience, there is much to be enriched. This is not so much a test, but in the eyes of everyone, it is a test of Lu Yan's current ability. The two talked, and it seemed that a long time had passed. In fact, everything is done in Chin's brain. It's just a moment. Wait until the two of them look up again. That cracked blue brick. It just approached Lu Yan, 3 feet away. But now Lu Yan looked up. Seeing that blue brick hit, it was in place, without any intention of moving. It was like being shocked by this scene. Isn't it? The response is so bad. Seeing this, Professor X frowned slightly. Chin's heart even mentioned his throat instantly. Although I just promised that Professor X would not interfere. But at this moment, seeing that the one I love is facing such a crisis, I can't help but have the meaning of using my ability. But right now, her right hand has just been raised. I heard a tremor. Next to Lu Yan, several purple undulation rings appeared out of thin air. This trick is exactly the fruitful ability that Fujitora had previously performed with a smile, and gravity rebounded. Gravity rebound use ability to release the purple gravity circle. Objects and attacks close to the gravity circle will be given a great reverse force to achieve the rebound effect. At this moment, Lu Yan, although he has only 5% control over the fruits. However, it is enough to rebound these broken bricks. Thinking about this, his right hand clenched slightly. The series of gravity loops tightened just like a spring. Opened suddenly. Immediately afterwards, I listened bang bang bang. A continuous sound of breaking through the sky sounded. A series of intensive attacks that had been thrown over by Beast Hank before. At this moment, it was intact, and he was all beaten back. I wipe. Can you even rebound the attack? See this scene. Chin and Professor X were naturally shocked. Beast Hank is even more astonished. But at this time, he didn't have time to surprise roar. Watching the rubble that he hits out, it bounces back at a faster speed. Can only step forward and dodge in the field in a hurry. The attack that was bounced back, although not hit. But it did make him very embarrassed. After he landed on the ground, he turned his head and looked at the tiny holes punched out by the gravel behind him. Hank's expression became even more solemn for a while. In my heart, I couldn't help but sigh. I think this ability is really scary. Not only can it control gravity, but since it can also rebound damage. If this is used well, it is not much weaker than Magneto. He sighed inwardly, but his voice did not fall. In the ear, Professor X's voice suddenly sounded. Don't be distracted, Hank, otherwise you might really lose this time. Hank was also taken aback when he heard the news. Before I could think about it, I looked up again. Immediately horrified, Lu Yan, who was standing still, took the initiative to step forward and rushed towards him. Moreover, the speed was actually several times faster than when he was beasted. Fast speed. Hank's pupils tightened. Following my heart, it is even more doubtful. How is this possible? Lu Yan is just an ordinary person. His speed, why is he faster than beasted himself? Looking at Hank with a suspicious expression on the opposite side. The corners of Lu Yan's mouth raised slightly, but he didn't explain. With heavy fruits, in addition to being able to exert gravity, it can naturally also lose weight. At this moment, under his control, his body weight is light to the extreme. So at this moment, it was Hank who was leaving, and he could only see an afterimage passing in front of his eyes. When I get back to my mind again, Lu Yan's figure actually appeared in front of him. Familiar bright smiling face, and along with this smiling face appeared. It was a fist of a casserole file size, and hit him fiercely at the door. Little devil, if you have been using that anti-gravity attack, I might still ignore you. But close. Humph, you are not my opponent. Quote. When Hank saw this, he rejoiced without panic. She yelled, but didn't plan to avoid it. Instead, he was ready to take a punch with his body. Take another shot at Lu Yan. When he thought about it, even if Lu Yan had fruit ability, his attack power would be at most ordinary people's level. For Beast Hank, the damage can be said to be minimal. Therefore, it is no problem for him to take a hard punch, and it is not painful or itchy at all. The facts are the same as he thought. Lu Yan did not have much strength when he fell with this punch. But he hasn't waited for him to be happy. Beast Hank's face changed again. Gravity again, with Lu Yan's punch down. The terrifying gravity, like a tide, followed his right arm and penetrated into Hank's body. Double, 10 times, 30 times. This sudden heavy pressure is like a big mountain, pressing on Hank's shoulders. The bones all over his body began to creak under pressure. Hank spoke again, originally wanting to say something. But at this time, there was only one pain in his mouth, roar. And with this painful cry, hearing a bang again. The blue bricks under his feet were crushed directly by the steps. Then under everyone's shocking gaze, this beast Hank actually looked like an invisible big hand, pressed directly into the soil from the surface. In the blink of an eye, there was only one head, and it remained outside. With just one punch, he almost buried Hank alive. Seeing the body shape as tightly trapped by the mud, Hank struggling in the ground, Professor X was also a little skeptical about life at this time. This is too strong. The mutant just now awakening, is it so strong? He is puzzled here. Ah, Lu Yan, you idiot! Hank yelled. Rushed out of the ground like a cannonball. Shaking his fist, he was ready to continue to fight back. But at this time did not wait for the two to fight again. Professor X from the rear suddenly spoke and stopped Hank. Enough, stop it. This is the end of the competition. Hank. You lost. Quote, no, I haven't lost yet. It was just an accident. I was careless. Beast Hank spoke, his face full of irritation. Obviously, I feel very dissatisfied with the result of the battle just now. But Professor X did not listen to his explanation. Hearing the news, he just shook his head. If you lose, Hank, but there is no need to make excuses for yourself. Although I don't like you going out to fight, in the scene just now, if you really change the battlefield, you would have been dead, and the other party would not give you any chance to resist. Quote. Professor X spoke calmly and stated the facts. Hank, who was originally angry, gradually calmed down. After a moment of silence, although I didn't want it in my heart. In the end, he bowed his head and recognized this fact. Definitely, I'm still not convinced by this. He hummed at Lu Yan, smelly boy, don't be too proud of you too early. Next time, if you pick me up again, you won't have such good luck. I also look forward to the next fight. Lu Yan said with a smile. There is no humility. Definitely, he didn't fall into the air because of this, and ignored all the X-Men. After all, he knew it well. Hank was originally not particularly good at fighting. His position in the X-Men is more like Professor X's assistant, and he prefers the feeling of science geek. It's a far cry from Wolverine's brainless man. Besides, Hank really underestimated the enemy this time. It can be seen from the initial tentative attack. He didn't regard Lu Yan as a level opponent at all. It is precisely because of this that the opportunity was missed and Lu Yan was frantically suppressed. If it is true, it will fight for life as soon as it comes up. Only Lu Yan, who has only heavy fruits, 5% control, may not be able to eat the other party. Definitely, there is no such option in the world. And if he fights again, he will be worthy of Hank. Because now, with the end of his confrontation, the rewards of God-level selection were also issued again. Ding! The choice is successful, and the fruitful proficiency is plus 5%. A personal pop-up window that only he could see popped out in front of his eyes. Lu Yan watched, and the corners of his mouth immediately raised a nice arc. Heavy fruits proficiency is 10%. This is exactly what he needs. Now he really has the capital to protect himself in this troubled world. Thinking about it, he lowered his head again and let out a sullen breath. The look under his eyes is rarely exhausted. As soon as I took control, I used ability so frequently. With his current ordinary human body. Obviously a little overwhelming. Fortunately, at this moment, he just bowed his head. There was already a warm little hand behind, reaching out. He supported his body. Lu Yan turned his head. Right on it was the little blushing face of Qin. Although she didn't say a word, her eyes blinked with deep concern. This silly girl doesn't hurt in vain. Lu Yan looked at it, and there was a hint of warmth in his heart. Reached out and rubbed the hair of the piano. Looking at her, Yin Dao Xiaozui, I have the urge to think take a bite again. But he hasn't waited for him to move. It was out of place next to him, and a clear cough sounded again. Professor, if you have a bad throat, you can drink some Xuanbei Loquat ointment. The Chinese magic medicine can cure coughs. Lu Yan tilted his head and glared at the professor angrily. This light bulb, not bald yet, it turned out to be so bright. Don't you just touch your head in front of you? Why do you keep coughing? Lu Yan looked upset. Professor X is naturally speechless. The heart said, this is who I provoke. Obviously you guy, regardless of occasion, must show affection in front of a single dog, okay. How to listen to your voice, on the contrary, blame us. The professor thought of Mora again. All feelings were mixed in an instant. But at this moment, he would not chat with Luyan on this topic anymore. After a light cough, he went straight to the topic and asked Luyan again about his next plan. What plans does Luyan have? He must stay at Xavier School next and continue to study. Luyan hasn't said anything yet. Next to Beast Hank, he said his thoughts without thinking. In his opinion, Luyan left Xavier School before, completely because of the panic about Mutant and its ability. But now, Luyan suddenly awakening. Originally, it is an extremely powerful mutant. There are still problems with the previous concerns, and they will naturally be solved. Luyan has absolutely no reason not to stay at Xavier School. But the next moment, Luyan spoke again. The answer given shocked him. Leave? No, I still have my previous attitude, hoping to drop out of Xavier. What? Are you still leaving school? Ah, Luyan, are you going to drop out? With these words, Beast Hank and Chin both opened their mouths wide. I feel very incredible. There was only Professor X, as if he had guessed something. He lowered his head and sighed again. I feel a little sorry. No, Luyan, you stayed well with Xavier, why are you leaving suddenly? Chin returned to his senses and couldn't help asking. Next to Beast Hank, he was even more outspoken. He accepted the difference and said directly, yeah, didn't you say that you want to be with Chin all the time? How long has passed since? Why, you are going to throw it away. Leave the piano alone, leave it alone. Beast Hank asked. Seeing this, Luyan laughed again and said, I didn't say, this time I will leave alone. When I really want to leave, I will bring the piano girl with me. Huh, not only do you have to go, but you also have to bring the piano. Why is this? Do you have any dissatisfaction with our Xavier School? Beast Hank was completely confused. Luyan heard the words, but didn't look at him. Instead, he cast his gaze to the rear, Professor X, who was always silent in the wheelchair. Although from beginning to end, he did not speak. But Luyan knew that the professor was obviously waiting for an answer. An answer that can convince him to let people go. Looking at his silent look, Luyan thought for a while, and finally decided to confess. Because Xavier is not safe. Nonsense, Xavier was founded by a professor, and it has been several years now. During this period, it has been safe and sound. How could it be unsafe? Hank retorted. Luyan did not explain, and continued, hope Xavier will become a paradise for mutant. This idea is naturally good. But Professor, you should also understand the current situation of mutant in the world. They are all being killed and persecuted anytime and anywhere. In the future, as the contradictions between the two sides continue to deepen, how long do you think your Pure Land can be maintained? Xavier, after all, I still have to walk in front of the world. At that time, there will be glory, and there will also be countless troubles. As for me, what I fear most is trouble. Quote, how can it be so exaggerated? Xavier School, before has been very stable. Beast Hank retorted, it's just that he seems a little guilty when he utters these words. Luyan glanced at him, then said, you just said that, it's all the same before. After that, will you continue to be stable like this? Why not? Hank asked back. When it came to this, Luyan simply pointed out the words directly. Then he said, what happened to the earthquake not long ago, was it so forgotten by you? Earthquake. On the other side of the earth, there was a sudden earthquake in Egypt and Chin's nightmare. Don't tell me, you have forgotten these things. I don't think that Chin's dream is just an ordinary nightmare. Luyan spoke, hitting the nail on the head. Hank was silent directly. But Professor X's eyes from the rear were getting brighter and brighter. Looking at Luyan, he was a little surprised. Luyan, what do you know about things in Egypt? It is naturally impossible for Luyan to admit that he knows the future in advance. Although it is mutant, this kind of ability is too unbelievable. So Luyan, when he heard the words, shook his head without hesitation. Sorry, I don't know what is going on behind this. But Professor, your eyes can't deceive anyone. If I guessed correctly, you probably already know the answer. The nightmare about Chin. Or do you think that Yikin's ability, which appeared before, was just a nightmare? Quote. Luyan's voice fell to the ground. Chin's curiosity was also aroused, and he asked the professor busy, really related to my nightmare. Professor, what happened in Egypt? Quote, Chin asked. The eyes of everyone present fell on Professor X. Seeing this, Professor X finally stopped hiding. He said in a leisurely tone, since mutant was discovered in 73 years, in addition to hostility among humans, there have also been enthusiastic fans of mutant. They took mutant's appearance as a sign of God's recovery. So they began to look for the God in their hearts. Grace Saba Nur all over the world. The discovery of Egypt has something to do with him. Quote, God, what kind of God is this? Chin was a little confused. Regarding God, she only heard of God, Sakyamuni. Professor X glanced at her and added, the God of mutant, they believe in him, is the first mutant in the world. The world's first mutant. Mutant, didn't it start in 73 years? That's just our theory. In fact, many people think that mutant has existed for a long time, but they have been hiding before. Professor X continued to explain. As for the piano, he was deeply shocked. This, impossible. Is it possible that the previous earthquake in Egypt and my nightmare are all related to Saba Nur? However, this guy should be dead long ago. Could it be his ability, eternal life? Chin is still puzzled. Professor X continued to explain, it's not eternal life, but it's almost the same. I checked the information before. The ability of Saba Nur is to transfer one's own consciousness into the body of others. Whenever he was dying, he would change his body in order to achieve alternative immortality. Quote, Chin frowned, such a pervert. Does this conversion have no side effects? No, not only that, if the target being converted is mutant, he can still plunder the opponent's ability. If this is true, then he has lived for tens of thousands of years and is almost omnipotent. Chin was shocked again. I didn't expect it at all. A previous earthquake in Egypt would involve such a character. Professor, in Egypt, that Saba Nur has really recovered. After returning to his senses, Chin couldn't help but ask Professor X again. There is a possibility. Even if it's only possible, it's scary enough. Is it good or bad for such a guy to recover? He isn't necessarily a villain, right? Chin also took some flukes. Lu Yan smiled bitterly, and said next to him, what a silly girl, you expect a monarch from the slavery era to be a law-abiding citizen in the new world after he is reborn, is it possible? Besides, Saba Nur has another name, called Apocalypse. Quote, oh, Lu Yan, do you still know Apocalypse? This time it was Professor X's turn to be surprised. He intended to find an ordinary person to come to Xavier, and experiment to see if he can better integrate into the big group of mutant. It now appears that the ordinary person he was looking for is becoming more and more mysterious. Familiar with history, Professor? I went to listen to the history class you took in person before. Lu Yan lied without blushing and heartbeat. However, the previous history class taught by Professor X did talk about Egyptian history and apocalypse. He can't fault it either. God, apocalypse, the end of the world in the Bible. Chin shook his words a little. Only then did I understand why Lu Yan insisted on taking himself away. Such people, if they want to target Xavier, it is indeed a disaster for Xavier School. At this point, everyone fell into silence. After a while, Professor X still spoke here. But this time, he didn't persuade Lu Yan again. Instead, he agreed to his request to take Chin away. Do not misunderstand. He did this at the moment. Naturally there is no idea of adult beauty. But considering the current violin, the state of power control is really unstable. He was also worried that if it was apocalypse, they would really hit the door and make trouble for them. If the piano is stimulated, it may cause a series of adverse reactions. So in this case, it would be a good idea to ask Lu Yan to take the piano away from Xavier School. But at the moment his words have only just been spoken. Haven't waited for Lu Yan to agree. The Chin who was silent next to him suddenly spoke again. He firmly expressed his attitude and said, no, I will not leave, even if I want to leave, I will not leave at this time. Xavier School, seeing a big crisis is coming, I am leaving at this time, don't I just flee? Quote. Several professors heard the words, but did not answer. Seeing this, Chin hurriedly turned his head and begged to Lu Yan again. I hope she can work with herself to help Xavier tide over the difficulties. After all, this place is like home to him. Lu Yan looked at Chin's reaction, only to feel a big head. I was wondering whether to obey the will of this guy Chin. Stay in Xavier. Looking up again, I was surprised to find out. On the top of Chin's head, another option box came out. God-level choice from Chin. 1. Women as trouble. Reject Chin's request, and leave alone, reward a single dog food. 2. Women, you should listen to men. Reject Chin's request, and insist on taking her away from Xavier, a place of right and wrong. Reward, heavy fruits proficiency plus 1%. 3. Being a man, be loyal to the sky, agree to Chin's request, stay in Xavier for the time being, wait for the opportunity, and reward a chance for a lucky draw in the Marvel world. Chapter 11. Well, there are a few cheating options again. Lu Yan glanced. The choice given here was immediately speechless. Item 1. Needless to say, nothing, only dog food. If he chooses this, there will be a hole in his head. The second reward increases the proficiency of the fruit by 1%. This reward, for him, although not bad. It's just a pity that the way of doing things is really deceptive. If it is really forced to take the Chin away from here. Not to mention, will it affect Chin's feelings for himself? But it will definitely increase the contradiction between himself and the X-Men in Invisible. Although he didn't want to get involved in mutants' affairs. But again, he was unwilling to fall out with the X-Men. After all, what people say is also the protagonist of the current storyline. Against the protagonist, isn't that unhappy? System, this is forcing oneself to be neutral. Forget it, then follow the piano once. Lu Yan lowered his head and muttered. Having said that, I finally chose item 3 and decided to stay in Xavier for the time being. He spoke and said his decision. Hearing the words here, Chin was overjoyed. For this man, willing to make a change for himself. And feel very pleased. Standing on tiptoe and banging, he took the initiative to kiss Lu Yan on the face. The look in his eyes at this moment was not to mention gentle. In Invisible, 2 single dogs, Professor X and Hank, were stuffed with dog food. Hit a ton of crit. As for Lu Yan himself, it didn't feel much at this time. The main focus is on the lucky draw opportunity given by the reward. With his choice over, the familiar tone sounded again. Ding, congratulations to the host, the choice is successful. The lottery module is starting. The familiar lottery interface appeared before his eyes again. Let's just start the lottery draw. Lu Yan clicked casually. Immediately following the huge amounts of lottery roulette in front of him, Kata started to spin. Various treasures circulated in front of him. But this time, nothing else appeared in the world. Most of what Lu Yan saw were items from Marvel's own world. I don't know what exactly can be drawn out in this lottery. It would be great if the Super Warrior Serum can be exploded. With that thing, my strength can be improved to a higher level. Lu Yan thought to himself, but also looked forward to it. In the end, Wang Hua landed. Accompanied by the prompt sound again, he was stunned again. Beep. Congratulations to the host for a successful draw and get the Marvel World item GH325 potion. The drug developed by the Tahiti Project is a resurrection drug developed by S.H.I.E.L.D. using the alien Kree. It was originally hoped to resurrect the dead Avengers, but it was not used on a large scale. Because S.H.I.E.L.D. found out that the drug had side effects after using it, the plan had to be terminated. GH325. Plan Tahiti. Lu Yan was taken aback when he saw the potion he had drawn out of the lottery. After that, I immediately thought of the American drama, S.H.I.E.L.D. Agent, I watched in my last life. The dead agent Phil Coulson in the American TV series. It was brought back to life by Chief Nick Fury using the Tahiti Project. To some extent, this potion can also be classified as an elixir that can give birth to deadman's flesh and bones. It's just that the side effects are a bit big. As mentioned in the introduction, Lu Yan remembers clearly that although Phil Coulson in the American drama Agent was successfully resurrected, he still left huge amounts of hidden dangers in spirit. According to the film, if the memory is not replaced in the later period, it is estimated that it will directly become mentally ill. So in general, this thing is actually a double-edged sword. Lu Yan thought. In his own mind, he defined this GH325. Although he turned his head, he still stored it in the storage space of the system. After all, it is a life-saving potion that can resurrect. But to be honest, Lu Yan didn't want to use this thing all his life. This time there is a high probability that I will be the old immortal of Apocalypse. The danger is very high. If you are careless, you will sacrifice. It is really not good, but it can be given to others. Similar thoughts passed by. In almost an instant, Lu Yan also had a rough candidate in his heart. And when he returns to God, it was discovered that Professor X and Beast Hank had already left. In the field, it seems that there are only 2 people left with him and Chin. What's the matter with you, Lu Yan? How do I feel? Today you are so easily distracted. The Chin in his arms was beside him at this moment, and asked with some worry. Lu Yan returned to his senses, laughed, and couldn't tell the secret of the system. I can only prevaricate that the physical energy was too much just now, so my spirit was a little trance. Hearing what he said, Chin didn't doubt it had it. Nodded, expressing belief. After helping Lu Yan up, he took the initiative to take him back to rest. Feel the soft jade warm fragrance in your arms. Lu Yan naturally did not reject the other party's kindness. I thought that Chin was going to send him back to his dormitory. However, this road turns around. After he actually reached the destination, he was stunned. It was discovered that the 2 of them came out of Chin's room unexpectedly. "Huh, Jin, do you want me to rest here?" Lu Yan was stunned, then subconsciously asked. When he turned his head again, he found that Chin's cheeks were already flushed. He dared not look at Lu Yan's eyes when he lowered his head. "Well, my place is a single-person accommodation, which is relatively quiet and not easy to disturb others." Single, not easy to disturb others. Are you suggesting something to me? Lu Yan laughed more happily when he heard the news. Deliberately approached Chin's side and asked her again. I don't know why, but he likes to see Chin's embarrassed and shy look. As for Chin, listening to his question, the blush on his face instantly climbed to the base of his ear. He also hurriedly spoke and explained, "No. Don't get me wrong, Lu Yan, I'm underage." Underage? Lu Yan was also stunned. Look at the bumps of Chin. There is a stature, and he was surprised. Are you still under adult? Well, so better not, don't be like that. The voice of Chin's words became smaller and smaller. In the end it sounded like a fly. Lu Yan, who is inspiring to be a scumbag, is a flower cluster veteran. Although I saw Chin's attitude, I knew that if I persisted, the other party would agree with 80%, half push half and half. However, he still has feelings for Chin after all. The thought of doing that as a minor may affect the body. He also had no choice but to suppress the evil fire in his heart. Is this girl on purpose? Come over. Lu Yan gritted his teeth, looking a little depressed. The most painful thing in the world is to be able to see but not to eat. But afterwards, his eyes lit up again after thinking of something. Turning his head towards the piano, he asked enthusiastically, Jin, do you know how to eat sticks, lollipops, candy? Yes, how about I invite you eat sugar? The whole night passed by. Early the next morning, Lu Yan reached out and opened the curtains. The bedroom behind him seemed to have gone through a big battle. At first sight, it was already a mess. And the real owner of this room, Chin. At this moment, he was curled up in the corner of the bed, slightly curled up, with fiery red hair draped over his shoulders, and the whole figure looked like a lazy Persian cat. Lu Yan looked at the piano that was still asleep because of exhaustion at the moment. Think about everything last night again. The corners of his mouth rose slightly, and he couldn't help but laugh again. Last night, it was crazy enough. Although because the opponent did not have a true adult relationship, Lu Yan did not initiate the final charge. But as an old driver, there are many tricks. Last night, I also had a hard time tossing the piano. It can be said that this quiet girl who spends most of her time reading in school has gained a lot of knowledge in a real sense. Only then did I understand what happened between men and women. In addition to that, there are many ways to play. This night, both of them were very happy. Definitely, if you have to say, Lu Yan has any concerns. It is estimated that it is worrying. When this came up, the wrong skill tree was clicked. Will it cause later, Chin girl will go astray in this regard? Forget it, don't care, even if it goes astray, it's quite comfortable. Lu Yan thought happily. Turn your head, take a deep breath, and pack your spirits. Avertisement. But did not pull up the bed, still sleeping Chin, come to score twice. Instead, he went to the desk and sat down, turned on the computer, and prepared to search for global news. Although it was completely because of Chin's request, I stayed. But right now that we are ready to deal with apocalypse together. Then naturally he couldn't possibly, and he didn't have any strength at all. Turning on the computer at this time, I intended to search for relevant news on the Egyptian side of Luo. I want to see where the current apocalypse has recovered. The best thing is to get rid of this guy before he gathers the 4 apocalypse knights. But his teleportable ability is a bit perverted. It's not easy to ambush him. Lu Yan muttered in his heart. Click with the mouse and wait until the news website is actually opened. Looking at the news refreshed on the homepage banner, the whole person's brows instantly frowned. Breaking news. Someone reported to the Polish police, a small town in Poland, suspected to have found the whereabouts of the fugitive global wanted man, Magneto. The relevant Polish police attach great importance to this, and the relevant case is still under investigation. Magneto was discovered in Poland. Lu Yan was stunned for a while. Soon I thought of the plot in the original book. The global earthquake caused by the recovery of Apocalypse caused an accident in Magneto's secluded steel plant. The red boiler accidentally fell, and construction workers were about to be killed. Seeing this, Magneto, who lived in seclusion, was eager to save people and displayed his own power. But after saving the other party, instead of getting the other party's thanks, they reported it to the local police. Magneto, determined to live in seclusion, has no intention of fighting against the local police. But in this conflict, it led to the accidental death of his daughter and his wife. At this point, he once again embarked on the path of Blacken. Thinking of this, Lu Yan couldn't help but feel a little sigh. I feel that Magneto is really being forced on an anti-human road by some stupid donkeys among humans. When he first watched the movie, he felt distressed for Magneto. Now, see this news again. Naturally want to help. But I clicked in and glanced at the news broadcast time. It's unavoidable to feel sorry again. Yesterday's news. According to the timeline, even if we rush to the rescue, it is already too late. Magneto, I'm sorry, it can't be saved, and I can't help it. Lu Yan sighed, but after that, something came to mind. Get up quickly, after a simple wash. I went out and walked towards Xavier School, Professor X's office. This news is still very important. Before Mystique, I rushed to Xavier from abroad to find Professor X just for this. I want Professor X to help find Magneto's whereabouts. At this moment, Lu Yan told Professor X the news first, but he didn't want to steal the limelight from Mystique. On the contrary, I intend to try my best to persuade Professor X not to interfere with Magneto. But right now, after saying this in front of Professor X, sure enough, it caused the unanimous astonishment of everyone, including Professor X. Lu Yan, you made a special trip to tell me Magneto's current tragedy. Instead of asking me to help, you asked me not to interfere. Professor X's eyes widened, looking at Lu Yan hurriedly coming from the door. The eyes are full of doubts. At this time, because his IQ is superb, he can't avoid some doubts. Didn't figure it out. Lu Yan, what kind of medicine is selling in this gourd this time? Hank looked at him and couldn't help but mutter again. He said to Lu Yan, aren't you using the radical method? I want the professor, right away. Do you think I'm so boring? Lu Yan rolled his eyes out of anger. Hank didn't speak anymore. Professor X tapped the table with his hands and said calmly, I need a reason. Magneto's relationship with him is both foe and friend, and it can be said that he is a true confidant. In this case, Lu Yan advised him not to look for Magneto, who was in trouble. You really need to give him a reason. And it is a reason not to refuse. Fortunately, Lu Yan thought of countermeasures before coming here. Hearing Magneto's inquiry, the name I talked about last night burst out without thinking about it. Because of Apocalypse. Apocalypse, that Saba knew her. Professor X, as well as Beast Hank and Shockwave, who were present, were all taken aback. I really didn't expect that Lu Yan would even mention this name at this moment. Yes, it is him. Now that you know the identity of Saba Neuropocalypse, you should also know that after each recovery, he will select the 4 strongest mutants in the world to become his 4 Apocalypse Knights, defending his rule. Bar. Lu Yan asked rhetorically. There are smart people here. Beast Hank reacted instantly. Yes, Apocalypse does have such a tradition. And the strongest mutant in the world. Needless to say, there must be Magneto. As a global wanted man who used a stadium to surround the entire White House and almost killed the president, said that he is globally recognized as the strongest mutant. No one will feel wrong. So Apocalypse, it's very possible, has already contacted Magneto a step ahead of us. If this is the case, then we have to take action. Otherwise, wouldn't Magneto be allowed to fall? Professor X worried. The matter involved his best friend, and he was a little lost. Seeing this, Lu Yan said helplessly, actually, compared to the situation on Magneto, I am more worried about you, Professor. Who is worried about me? Sure enough, Lu Yan's words made Professor X stunned again. Everyone looked at each other. At this moment, even Professor X felt that he couldn't keep up with Lu Yan's thinking. Looking at him, he asked curiously, Lu Yan, are you worried about an accident in the next rescue operation? We can't convince Magneto. Lu Yan shook his head. No, my worry at this time has nothing to do with Magneto. To be precise, I am worried that you will become Apocalypse's next target. Quote. Apocalypse, the next goal. Seeing everyone puzzled, Lu Yan continued, don't forget the ability on the Apocalypse side, he can take away the mutant ability in a way similar to possessing others' body. You have been thinking about how to face Apocalypse, fight with him, and rescue Magneto and others. Haven't you thought about what would happen if Apocalypse wanted to attack Professor X? Quote. Lu Yan continued, at this time, it can be regarded as revealing the storyline of Apocalypse in disguise and the next plot. In the original book, Apocalypse was interested in Professor X's ability to connect with all human beings. Only then began the idea of robbing his body. It's just that all the people present didn't know it. Now everyone is following Lu Yan's words, falling into anticipation. I thought of the picture after the professor's ability was mastered by Apocalypse. Hiss. Even Beast Hank, who has always been self-sufficient, couldn't help taking a breath. That's horrible. Isn't Apocalypse really invincible by then? Let alone resist anyone. Even if I have a little bit in my mind, I want to deal with Apocalypse. I'm afraid it will be clear to Apocalypse in the first time. No, I can't let that guy's plan succeed. Beast Hank growled subconsciously, returning to his mind, looking at Lu Yan's gaze in front of him. Compared to before, he brought a little appreciation and gratitude. After all, the time for real contact between the two parties was only about 7 days. Although on Lu Yan's side, Awakening has a powerful ability, he can even compete with him. But Beast Hank was never a person who blindly praised power. He has always believed that wisdom is more precious than strength. It is precisely because of this that Lu Yan did not have a lot of favors before. But right now, it's different. Following Lu Yan's succession several times, he proposed ideas. He suddenly discovered that the boy in front of him named Lu Yan. It seems that it is not what he expected. There is a brave man. On the contrary, the other party's thoughts are rigorous and unconstrained, and they can always notice the flaws in their plans. This kid is a handsome man. A general is easy to find and hard to find. In fact, at this moment, it's not just Beast Hank. Even Professor X took another high look at Lu Yan. I feel that this Chinese student who I randomly selected from the street seems to be much better than it seems. Professor, I really found a treasure. Everyone has different thoughts. Lu Yan looked at their reaction at this moment, but was only happy. It wasn't because of anything else, but because I knew that this wave of notification in advance was not in vain. Not surprisingly, even if Professor X received Mystique's request, he would not rush to contact Magneto. Without contacting Magneto, there is a high probability that it will not be discovered by Apocalypse. Xavier's school should also be able to escape the end of being directly bombed. But it is just to avoid the school being bombed. Lu Yan knew clearly, I want Professor X, who are full of sense of justice, to give up the idea of continuing to be hostile to Apocalypse. That is completely impossible. Sure enough, after being persuaded by Lu Yan, Professor X and others gave up the idea of actively contacting Magneto. But after calming down, however, All his attention was focused on this resurrected apocalypse. This guy is really a hidden danger. Professor, I think we haven't paid enough attention to him before. He is too dangerous and has impure motives. Let me say, let's do better first and arrest him. Quote. Several Hank people spoke up one after another. There is a meaning to move towards apocalypse in advance. In the end, even Professor X participated in the discussion. And watching everyone's reaction, Lu Yan was speechless again. Suddenly I felt that the X-Men guys really don't know what tactical operations are. Well, in other words, they, whether they are Professor X or their members, are too immature. It is incomparable with the later. It's normal. Lu Yan thought so. The abnormal expression on his face has already been noticed by Professor X in the field. Lu Yan, what's wrong with you? Are you dissatisfied with the plan we have made here? Quote. Before the change, Beast Hank would never ask a freshman who had just entered school for 7 days such a major strategic question. But right now, facing Lu Yan is different. After a series of things. On Hank's side, Lu Yan was placed on the same position as himself in invisible. Moreover, this was a questioning, and it did not cause the astonishment of Professor X and others. Instead, everyone thinks it is definitely. It's just a change in people's mentality. Lu Yan himself did not pay attention. When I heard Hank, I asked him a question. When he spoke subconsciously, he replied, "It's nothing, I just think it's a bit too risky for us to make a sudden shot like this. Let me say, instead of making a shot at this time, it's better to hurry up and conduct pre-war assault training for everyone. For Xavier students, do assault combat training. What's the difference between that and Magneto's previous proposal to me?" When Professor X heard the news, he subconsciously wanted to refuse. But Lu Yan followed but said again, "Sometimes, mastering force does not necessarily mean harming others, but to protect ourselves better, just like the current situation. Professor, don't you really think that a group of mutants who have not undergone any training and only have a preliminary grasp of their own abilities can compete with Apocalypse, the first mutant? Do you want to see them die on the battlefield for no reason? War, but never affectionate." Quote. Lu Yan's voice was cold, and what he said made Professor X silent. After opening his mouth several times, there was no reason to refute. Before it was Magneto and Mystique, now it is Lu Yan. After repeated persuasion from everyone, even with Professor X at this moment, I couldn't help but feel a little shaken. I lowered my head and began to seriously think about whether my original intention to establish Xavier College was really wrong. Thinking about it this way, Professor X's thoughts were a little lost. At the moment, Lu Yan obviously didn't discuss the future of mutant with him. Seeing Professor X was a little shaken. Then he opened his mouth. Threw out the killer. In fact, not only for Xavier's Academy, I want to say that even Professor you need to strengthen your own strength at this time. Enhancing strength. Professor X returned to his senses, listening to Lu Yan's words, immediately laughed. My ability has been developed to the limit, except through external forces, I can no longer. He spoke, trying to explain his situation. But at this moment, he was just halfway talking, but was interrupted by Lu Yan again, said. I'm talking about more than just the enhancement of ability. A person's combat effectiveness is composed of many aspects, isn't it? For example, to teach you the current state, I would take the liberty to ask if your legs are repaired. In the battlefield, can it exert greater combat power? Quote. The influencing elements of combat effectiveness are multifaceted. As for Professor X, the biggest obstacle to restricting his ability is not others. It is his legs. The legs that had been scrapped in the first battle turned him into an extremely crispy magician. Once close by an outsider, it can be said that there is no resistance. This can be seen in the follow-up plot of the original storyline of Apocalypse. Professor X at the time. Professor X after being completely suppressed by Apocalypse in mental power. The combat effectiveness is simply not comparable to that of ordinary adults, and it is completely passive. And I still want to run, the kind that can't move. That's why Lu Yan wanted to help him restore his legs. As for the way to restore the legs, naturally nothing else, it was the GH325 potion obtained from the previous lottery. The potion that even dead man can resurrect, repairing the broken spine leg injury is of course no problem. Although this thing has side effects, the impact of that kind of mental power should be minimal for Professor X. Lu Yan thought so, and then returned to his senses. There was already a series of shocked roar in the field. What are you talking about to make the professor recover his legs and stand up again? Lu Yan, are you kidding me? Everyone surprised roar one after another. Even with Professor X himself, a touch of excitement flashed across his eyes. Leg disease can be said to be one of his biggest heart problems. If it can really heal the legs, for Professor X, it is naturally a good thing to dream of. This joy only lasted for a moment. Professor X calmed down again, but smiled bitterly again. He thought of the medicine he had injected during the depression period. Although that kind of medicine can make Professor X regain his combat power, but it suppressed the ability in his body, makes him unable to use abilities. And then, there will be a confrontation with a powerful mutant like Apocalypse. If Professor X is unable to use his mental power, then he is truly abolished. Okay, Lu Yan, now is not the time to make jokes. Professor X spoke and interrupted Lu Yan, beckoning him not to continue. Lu Yan also looked up when he heard the news, watching Professor X's reaction, but vaguely guessed what he was thinking. Then, he laughed again. Who is joking with you, Professor? I'm serious. I do have a potion that can restore your leg injury. The kind of potion you mentioned. We have discovered it a long time ago. Although it can restore my walking ability, it will curb my ability. I don't plan to use it right now. Professor X is weak. Lu Yan shook his head when he heard the news. A serious way. It seems that you and I are not talking about the same thing. Professor, don't be so pessimistic. I can assure you that the medicine given to you can recover your injury. But it will definitely not curb your ability. Quote. What? You still have this medicine in your hand? How can this be? Yeah, how is this possible? Isn't this medicine without side effects? This is not just Professor X. Hank couldn't help asking aloud. Lu Yan didn't intend to hide anything, and confessed directly in front of everyone. Definitely has side effects, but the side effects should be minimal to the professor. After speaking, he followed up in GH 325. I told Professor X about the spiritual impact. As predicted, this so-called side effect, after being told by him, Professor X didn't take it to heart at all. What kind of mental trauma can even be eliminated by replacing the memory that is just for ordinary people? For Professor X, such a natural mental power is superb, and the metamorphosis to the extreme top mutant. This mental damage, it's really minimal. When he was a child, he couldn't really control his ability. But every day, he has to endure similar devastation. It is said that a long illness becomes a cure. Now, on the mental side of the brain. No one knows better than a professor. It is precisely because of this that I have finished listening to Lu Yan now. The professor, without even trying, can determine that this side effect has almost zero impact on himself. If what Lu Yan said is true, then there really is a potion made for me in this world. As soon as he thought of this, Professor X was naturally excited. But after a moment of excitement, then new doubts came to my heart. He raised his head again and turned to Lu Yan, and couldn't help asking again. Such a terrifying potion, Lu Yan, where did you get it? With his questioning, the crowds who were originally noisy in the field also quieted down. At this moment, he raised his head and his eyes were on Lu Yan, who was looking at him. There are some doubts in the eyes. Before Professor X said, they hadn't paid attention. Think about it now. Really, how could such a terrifying potion appear in Lu Yan's hands casually? Although he has awakening ability at this time, he is considered a top mutant. But a few days ago, he was still an ordinary Chinese civilian. Said that he had developed such a terrifying medicine in advance. That's impossible. Lu Yan didn't panic when he heard the professor's questioning. In fact, before he took out the medicine, he had already figured out the relevant rhetoric in his mind. Seeing everyone cast their eyes on him now. After that, my face is not red and my heart beats. Started nonsense. He didn't explain directly, but asked rhetorically. SHIELD, the professor should have heard of it. SHIELD, that organization co-founded by Peggy Carter and Howard Stark. Professor X and the others were taken aback for a moment, but he didn't expect that he would suddenly mention this. However, he had obviously heard the name of S.H.I.E.L.D. You don't want to tell me that this medicine was developed by S.H.I.E.L.D., right? It was originally. When Lu Yan heard the news, he nodded directly without any negative meaning. What? Then S.H.I.E.L.D. medicine, how could it appear on your body? Is it possible that you are the agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Hank frowned, and then looked at Lu Yan's expression, but they all became vigilant. Although there is not much contradiction between them and S.H.I.E.L.D. However, no one likes 2 or 5 boys. So at this time, I raised my eyes again and looked at Lu Yan's gaze, which became weird. What do you think? I don't have that superb acting skills yet and can play the role of an agent. Lu Yan was still smiling. Everyone was afraid, and asked, then this potion. My parents used to be researchers in S.H.I.E.L.D.-related projects. This medicine is the result of their research. Lu Yan said. Who can prove it? Hank asked several people. Lu Yan shrugged. No one can. The medicine is here anyway. If you don't worry, you can first test its safety. After speaking, Lu Yan directly threw the GH325 potion from his arms. Beast Hank hurriedly caught it with his hands. Still want to talk? Lu Yan had already reached the door of the office, waved his hand, and left. Let's go now, Lu Yan. Lu Yan, several Hank shouted from behind. Seeing Lu Yan's side, he didn't look back. He couldn't help but bowed his head, and started thinking in pieces. This brat shouldn't be angry because of our cross-examination. Shockwave is aside, a little worried. Hank glanced at the potion in his hand, then raised his head. His gaze fell on Professor X next to him, with a questioning expression in his eyes. Professor X was silent when he saw this. After a while, he said, let's get the laboratory test first. If what Lu Yan said is true, then it doesn't matter where the medicine came from. Hank nodded solemnly. It's been a long time since he had seen Professor X look like this, looking full of expectation. On the other side, Lu Yan walked on the campus trail with arms folded. He looked indifferent. Regarding the lie that I told my parents in front of everyone just now from S.H.I.E.L.D. I didn't worry about it at all, I was exposed. After all, the main energy of the current X-Men is affected by Apocalypse. In a short period of time, there should be no possibility of contact between the two parties. As for the follow-up, wait until Professor X is really cured of his leg injury. Proved that the medicine is harmless. So where does this thing come from? Is that important? It is estimated that no one will root out the problem and pursue it. After all, who doesn't have a secret this year? After doing all of this, Lu Yan felt a lot easier for the whole person inexplicably. For the help of the X-Men, Lu Yan feels that he has done everything he can do at this stage. And then, his main task is to improve his strength as much as possible. This is not just to deal with Apocalypse. It is also to deal with the dangers that may arise in the next Marvel world. Thinking like this, he thought again. Looking at my personal panel, it shows that there is only 10% of the control degree of plenty of fruits. Then ask the system again. System, how can you improve this control degree? Can it only be through your random choices? If it is, then you should also use more similar control degrees. Ding. The option refresh of the system is completely random and uncontrollable. In addition, since it is a control degree, it is natural that the more you use it, the higher the proficiency and the higher the control degree. Oh, it means to keep training. In addition to the above 2 methods, are there any additional ways to improve control? Lu Yan licked his mouth. Some asked impatiently. 10% control is really not enough. He is even stronger. And the reply from the system did not disappoint him. System. Ding. The host can unlock rewards and increase control by completing special achievements. Special achievement. What special achievement? When Lu Yan heard the news, his spirits came instantly. Busy to ask. System. This requires the host to explore on its own, and the system cannot interfere. Gee, come here again, half talking, you are going to be beaten, you know, young man. Lu Yan was unhappy. However, I kept asking, seeing the system, there was no response. Helpless, I can only give up the idea of continuing to dig into the roots. He lowered his head again, and started thinking seriously in his own heart. I feel that since it is a special achievement, it should have something to do with the protagonist of the storyline. It's just that his interaction with the protagonist during this period of time is not too small. Why? The achievement system is not triggered. Is it possible to interact in other ways? Lu Yan walked on the campus, vaguely, feeling as if he had caught the point. I lower my head, thinking about who I should interact with. There was a sudden noise in my ears. Looking up again, I found myself walking to the lake without knowing it. Hank, who was still discussing with Professor X in his office. I don't know when I appeared here. Talking to a young man with his eyes covered with gauze. These glasses are specially made of red stone. They can refract the laser light emitted by your eyes and store them all in the vector field. Quickly, bring them and try them, Hank said, and handed a black spectacle to the young man. The young man took it and opened his eyes carefully. Seeing the world reappearing in front of my eyes, I was particularly excited. Although Lu Yan had never seen this guy before. But when he looked at his current look, he guessed it. This guy is not someone else, but in the original book, Chin's boyfriend, Cyclops. Definitely, the current Cyclops has just entered Xavier School and has not yet become the captain of the X-Men. Of course, let alone fall in love with Jin. This is the original storyline that hasn't happened yet. But now that Lu Yan has become Chin's boyfriend, he was also not prepared to let this story happen according to the original trajectory. I was still thinking about how to dispose this Cyclops. Looking up again, he found that no one in Cyclops was reading towards the piano under the big tree at this moment, after walking over. His face also changed immediately. Decisively abandoned the gentle policy that I just envisioned in my head. Clenched his fists. Definitely, Cyclops himself doesn't know anything about all this. His immediate attention was all on the piano sitting under the tree. At this time, watching Chin bow his head, flipping through the books. I just feel that this girl is so gentle. Looking at it, the whole person can't help but feel a little silly. Speaking subconsciously, he asked Hank next to him. Who is the girl under the tree? You mean her, Jean Grey. You've seen it before. Hank glanced and replied casually. Didn't think too much. I didn't notice the smile at the corner of Cyclops' mouth. Then he didn't wait for Hank to say anything. Cyclops has already taken the initiative. In the direction of Jean Grey, walked over. Looking at that posture, it was obvious that he wanted to make a move, roar. Leave a good impression on the other party first. This guy, isn't it interesting to Chin? Hank looked at Cyclops from behind and looked at something wrong. Think of Lu Yan again. This time I made a clear cough and spoke again, just about to remind Cyclops. But I don't want to. At this moment, Cyclops hasn't waited, but here is really close. There was a sudden tremor on the ground under his feet. Turning over like a dragon. Made Cyclops, a stagger, fell directly to the ground. Then I raised my head and looked forward. I was shocked to discover that the bluestone that I had just stepped on was just under my feet. It all fell apart. At this time, the pieces of bluestone accumulated together, floating and sinking in front of this Cyclops. It's like a natural wall between him and Chin. What is going on? Cyclops looked at this scene in a daze. Hank at the back, after being astonished, his expression immediately became serious. Turning his eyes, it was an instant to find the culprit. Towards under the big tree not far away, the smiling black-haired man snorted coldly. With helplessness deep in the eyes, said, Lu Yan, what are you doing? This is our new classmate who just enrolled. Don't target others. Quote. Yes, it's between Cyclops and Chin right now. Naturally, it is nothing else, it is the barrier that Lu Yan deliberately created by using the plenty of fruits ability. After knowing Hank's side, after discovering himself, Lu Yan looked up here and laughed again. Not because of this, it really meant to stop. On the contrary, he waved his hand, somewhat disapprovingly said. What is targeted and not targeted? Beast, you are talking now, but it is getting harder and harder to hear. Who do you think of me, Lu Yan? Am I the kind of senior who can shoot at others casually? How can it be? This is purely my own strength. I haven't been in control yet, and it's caused by energy dissipation. You have to believe me. The situation at this time. It's really not my intention. Quote. Not what you meant. I believe you a ghost. Hank rolled his eyes. I didn't even intend to believe Lu Yan's nonsense. Because right now, with the time he speaks, Cyclops, who had fallen to the ground, was shocked again by roar. Gravity suppression. 5 times the gravity. Buzz. An invisible force field directly acts on Cyclops. Cyclops, who originally wanted to stand up from the ground, puffed and lay on the ground again. Enough, Lu Yan, stop it. Cyclops, I didn't know that Chin already has a boyfriend. Hank continued to persuade. As for Cyclops, it is not an idiot. After a brief period of depression. After listening to the conversation between the two, I also roughly guessed the identity of Lu Yan. Co-worked with oneself to make a sister unsuccessful, but instead ran into the other's real boyfriend. Thinking about it, his first feeling was naturally embarrassing. But after embarrassment, following my heart, I can't help but feel a little irritated. I just wanted to make a move in the past. Roar, Lu Yan, are you too domineering to do this? With 5 times the pressure, he slowly got up. Cyclops gritted his teeth and asked Lu Yan. Overbearing. Lu Yan was taken aback. Looking down at Cyclops, he laughed again, disapprovingly. I am so domineering, but, what can you do with me? Lu Yan narrowed his mouth. With you, brat, you want to dig my corner. Is it reasonable? Lu Yan is not much to compare. The backhand directly moved towards the void and made another downward pressure. Gravity suppression. 10 times of gravity. ... Gravity doubles. Cyclops' body followed a stagger. But this time, he was prepared and didn't fall to the ground. Just the green veins on the forehead. One by one burst. Enough, Lu Yan is enough. Hank watched by and persuaded again. At this time, his figure is also slightly enlarged. Looking at that posture, I also intend to beast. The two who were about to forcibly hold back and clashed. But at this time, I haven't waited for Beast Hank to move again. Lu Yan's ears suddenly heard the sound of roar, which was full of anxiety. No, Lu Yan, go. When Hank heard the news, he also turned his head. Looking at the scene again, it is also terrifying. It turned out that at this moment, Cyclops in rage had actually taken off the special glasses he had just brought on. A scarlet laser spewed from his eyes. This time, it was like 2 sharp swords. Toward Lu Yan's location, go fiercely. This guy is also messing around. Before Hank, but with Professor X. When Cyclops entered school, he tested the power of his eye laser. It is precisely because of this. This time I feel terrified. I can't imagine how the laser would react if it really hit Lu Yan right now. ... All fooling around. Among the classmates, how can you play such a killer? Hank was indignant. Looking at Lu Yan's gaze again, there is a little more worry. After all, this attack is much stronger than his previous methods in terms of destructive power alone. He originally believed that with Lu Yan's current strength, he couldn't compete at all. Can only dodge in the vastness. But the next moment. However, he saw the familiar purple gravity ring, which appeared in front of Lu Yan again. His counterattack was much quicker than Hank expected. Gravity rebound. Controlling objects and hitting people. Kung Fu in the blink of an eye. Lu Yan mobilized the 2 skills of heavy fruits in an instant. At this time, he stormed forward. The attack from Cyclops just now was not only left intact, but all bounced back. The Shikuais who were originally lying between the Chin and Cyclops. At this moment, they all came alive. It's like having spirituality. Also stormed towards Cyclops. Cyclops, as the captain of the X-Men in the future, naturally has extraordinary ability. But no matter how you say it, right now, he has just entered school after all. It's really cute and new. Fighting skills can be said to be totally ignorant. In this case, suddenly faced with such a dense offensive, like raindrops. Naturally panicked, can only passively use laser light to sweep towards all sides. Looks very embarrassed. But here Lu Yan didn't mean to let Cyclops go. While Cyclops was hit by stones on all sides, it was overwhelming. After that, he performed gravity suppression again. This time, it was directly pressed down by 30 times the force of gravity. 30 times the weight is undoubtedly the last straw to crush the camel. Cyclops, who could barely cope with it just now, grunted, and finally couldn't support it. The figure movement immediately slowed down. As his movements slowed down, the stones that were originally isolated from him, as well as the laser light that bounced back, hit him firmly. Said it was late, then it was fast. Everyone nearby felt that it was just a blink of an eye. Immediately I heard a bang. Look back again and take a closer look. Cyclops' whole person was actually blown out directly from the spot. A deep hole was smashed in the lawn. The whole person swayed and looked at Lu Yan. I haven't said a word yet, and he has fainted directly. Yeah, is this over? Cyclops was defeated so quickly. With such a big movement and people coming and going in the school, there are naturally many onlookers. Although everyone had already anticipated the outcome of the battle when they first started. But to be honest, after really seeing this scene, still inevitably shocked. It's not that it shocked others, but Lu Yan's speed of winning. It's too fast. After all, Cyclops are not ordinary mutants. His younger brother Shockwave is now one of the top combat powers next to Professor X. As for himself, it was even when he first entered school. It has been defined by Professor X as a mutant with top-level abilities. Such a person, even if the initial awakening combat effectiveness is not as good as Lu Yan, it should not be much weaker. At least you can fight for 10 rounds. But who would have thought that they would really fight each other? Not even a minute passed. The other party was beaten on the ground. Don't talk about them. Even Beast Hank, watching this scene, inevitably opened his mouth. Suddenly, I felt that the ability level that the professor had judged Lu Yan before seemed to be improved by another level. Definitely, after a brief shock, Hank returned to his senses, and hurried forward to investigate Cyclops' injuries. After discovering that he was only fainting, his body was not severely damaged. This is a sigh of relief. But right now, he hasn't waited for him to speak anymore. Lu Yan has spoken in the back, quietly said, "Don't worry, I control my strength. This is just a lesson, and it won't really hurt Cyclops." Quote. Lesson. You call this just a simple lesson? It's not that I said, Lu Yan, what you did was really too much. Quote. Hank looked indignant. Lu Yan still waved his hand indifferently, saying, "How can it be so exaggerated as you said? He would be fine if he went back to sleep, at most he suffered some skin injuries. In fact, this is really for his good. Hank, think about mutant who just started enrolling, especially at the level of Cyclops, who is not arrogant and has eyes above the top. This was a lesson from my senior. Not only can they recognize reality more quickly, but they can also work harder and train hard since then. Isn't this a good thing?" Quote. Lu Yan's clever tongue is like a spring, turning black and white upside down. When Hank heard the news, he felt that his nose was getting crooked. What does it mean to be good for them? What is called senior? If I remember correctly, you only enrolled a week earlier than Cyclops, right? This senior, are you embarrassed? Hank looked upset. Lu Yan was unmoved. What happened in a week? 1 hour earlier, that is also senior. Who is not convinced? Dissatisfied, hit him until he was convinced. Lu Yan thought, clenching his fists. Hank gritted his teeth again when he saw his movements, and said, "Co-author, according to your wishes, you will come this way for every freshman in the future." Hank intended to mock Lu Yan. Who would have thought that when Lu Yan heard the news, he actually thought about this problem in an extraordinary way. After a while, he said seriously, "Don't tell me, I think this is a good idea, you can consider it." Consider, you fighting freak. Wait, I will tell Professor X all about you and let him punish you. Quote. Hank was also completely lost temper by Lu Yan's side. Shin said that when he first enrolled, how could he be blind, and did not see that under the gentle appearance of this Chinese boy, there was such a crazy heart hidden. Hank's face is cloudy. Lu Yan looked at, but smiled even more happily. He is definitely not the violent maniac in Hank's mind. At this time, the lesson Cyclops was really just looking at this potential rival and wanted to cut off his thoughts about the piano in advance. As for the final request, I want to challenge the freshmen of Xavier School. This is even simpler, because after he just knocked down the Cyclops, a special achievement that has been miserable before, it actually unlocked one. Ding. Congratulations to the host for unlocking the special achievement, stun the future rivals, and the control of plenty of fruits increased to 11.7%. Activate ability Gravity Light. Yes, his fruitful control has really improved. Although only 1.7%. But this is enough to make Lu Yan feel excited. What's more, right now, in addition to the increase in his control, it even activated the fruit's new ability. Light of gravity. Use ability to release a purple gravity wave. The object hit by the gravity wave will instantly strengthen the gravity, and it can also pull the hit object instantly. It turned out to be the light of gravity. It's really interesting. Lu Yan is eager to try. At this time, I felt the new knowledge about the fruits of gravity that came out of my mind at this time. He couldn't wait to reach out and try it now, but before he could move, he was interrupted again by the roar next to him. I'm talking to you, Lu Yan. Do you guys take our Xavier school rules into consideration? Then again, believe me or not. Hank talked endlessly. Lu Yan raised his head when he heard the news, looked at him a little impatiently but didn't show him any face. Follow along. Again, if this happens again, what about expelling me? This is indeed a good way for students. But Assistant Professor Hank, you seem to have forgotten. I am no longer a student at Xavier School. Quote, When Hank heard the news, the whole person was in a daze. Then I remembered that the guy in front of him seemed to have dropped out of Xavier on his own initiative. And he had already planned to leave yesterday, this place he was talking about right and wrong. The reason for staying seems to be the result of the painstaking persuasion of myself and Professor X last night. Just thought of this. Hank is big again. I naturally regretted my previous actions. But now, what else can he do? Change your mind. Do you really drive away Lu Yan? That can't be done. After all, GH 325, the potion that can successfully stand up against each other, is provided by the opponent. If it is really useful, I will have to ask for Lu Yan in the future. Thinking about this, his expression was also fluctuating. Lu Yan looked at his tangled appearance, but laughed again. Reaching out and patted him on the shoulder, he said indifferently. Okay, Hank, don't worry about it. Didn't I tell you everything? A piece of cake. It's just for his girlfriend. You have this time, aiming at me here, entangled with this. Might as well go to the school classroom and see your dream girl. Quote. Look at who, the lover of your dream. Hank didn't react a little, Lu Yan meant. Seeing this, Lu Yan's smile became more and more interesting. After a while, faintly uttered 3 words. Mystique. These 3 words are one export. Hank, who was originally calm, exploded in an instant. Mystique, you said Mystique returned to Xavier. Don't get excited, it's back. I saw her on the way just now, our beloved mutant hero. Lu Yan smiled. Saying this at this time was purely to divert Hank's attention. Very awesome skills. But it did succeed. No way, Mystique is Hank's weakness. Hearing Lu Yan say this, Hank's side was very ethical, and left the unconscious Cyclops in place. Turning his head alone, he hurriedly ran in the direction of Xavier's classroom. If you guys lie to me, I will never end with you. Before leaving, Hank called to Lu Yan. Lu Yan looked at the back of Hank leaving. Thinking about the entanglement between this guy and Mystique, he couldn't help but shook his head again. I knew that the hope in Hanko might be lost once again. Mystique is back with this. Not for him. 3 minutes of silence for the poor single dog. After that, Lu Yan finally looked to the rear, Chin, who had not spoken. She always smiled and looked behind her when she published the Constitution. Cannot help but smile, stretched out her hand and scraped off her Chong nose. Asked actively again and said, why, when you see your man fighting with others, don't you stand up and stop it? Hee, why stop it? Lu Yan is so handsome when he teaches people. Chin smiled and said, with a sweet face at this time. Lu Yan was a little surprised when he saw it. Why, am I wrong? No, it's just that you originally thought you would teach me like Hank. I thought I was a violent maniac or something, but now seeing your reaction, I was a little surprised. Lu Yan explained. Chin pursed his mouth when he heard the words. Said, how is it possible? Lu Yan can be jealous for me, I am too happy to be too late. The Cyclops. You mean him. This guy is slick, he is not a good person at first sight, I don't like it. Lu Yan, even if you didn't speak just now, I won't pay him any attention. Obviously you made a mistake, and you almost got punished. HMPH, this guy, let me run into it next time, I want to beat him too. Quote. As Chin said, there was an expression of disgust on his face. He shook his own little fan fist. Lu Yan looked at her with a sincere expression on her face, which didn't seem to be fake. The whole person was taken aback again. Shin said how the storyline of this plot is different from the original development. But when you turn your head and think about it, it's clear. The piano in the original book has a good impression of Cyclops as soon as they meet. That's because the entire Xavier school, except Cyclops, other students of the same age fear her and treat her as a monster. To put it bluntly, Cyclops took advantage of the void. But now the situation is different. Because of the early blending of Lu Yan. The Chin at the moment almost feels that she is the happiest woman in the world. Where can I feel lonely? In this case, looking at Cyclops again is just looking at each other with ordinary eyes. And if you look at it with normal eyes, the Cyclops, which are flowing in the air, obviously do not meet the mate selection criteria of a quiet piano since childhood. In addition, the other party just spoke rudely towards Lu Yan. Ready to plot against him. For Cyclops, where does Chin still have a good impression? Even disgust is extreme. This sudden psychological change was completely unexpected by Lu Yan. But at this time, when he returned to his senses, he was also happy to see the result. Then he played the piano and sat down by the tree. It is also a rare easy time to enjoy together. Time flies, and it's almost night. But the sweetness of the two-person world didn't last long. Here at Shockwave, I found it. Although he, because of the conflict between his brother Cyclops and Lu Yan, was somewhat unhappy in his heart. But he is much more stable than Cyclops. When I came here, I just talked about business. Towards Lu Yan, he said solemnly, Lu Yan, Professor X, call you to come over. Got it, I'm going now. Lu Yan nodded, not only did not panic about the hostility here in Shockwave. On the contrary, a little eager to try. In fact, he really wants to try it and continue to beat Shockwave. Will it also be able to unlock special achievement rewards? Definitely. He also knows that he can't act too aggressively at this time. Therefore, it was the first time he got up and went back to Professor X's office. But when I entered at this time, I didn't see Professor X first. On the contrary, he first saw a beautiful woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, who was looking at himself at this time. There was curiosity in his eyes. This woman is so famous. Lu Yan also recognized the woman's identity at a glance. No one else, it is Mystique Raven. You are the Lu Yan. At this moment, the two met, before Lu Yan could speak. Mystique was very interested and asked first. For Mystique, who is now the hero of Mutant, Lu Yan naturally also respects. Although respectful, but not as exaggerated as other Mutant. Hearing her question, he just nodded. It's me, Mystique Raven, I've been admired for a long time. Oh, have you heard my name? Mystique asked rhetorically. Lu Yan shrugged and said, the White House incident is well known. If I say that I don't know you at this time, it would be strange, right? If you guessed correctly, it's not Professor X who is looking for me at this time, but you. Lu Yan was very carefree, and didn't hide his thoughts. When the Mystique in front of him heard the news, he raised his head and laughed again. Nor did it deny it. On the contrary, he nodded very calmly. Yes, it is indeed me. I just heard Charles Professor X and I was curious when he mentioned something about you, so I called you to come over and take a look. At first glance, it is indeed well deserved. You guys are indeed different from those students in Xavier High School. To be honest, compared to those ignorant students, and Charles, you are more like another person. Quote. Who? Old Horse Eisenhart, Magneto. Lu Yan was stunned. Then he shook his head and said, sorry, I am myself, unlike anyone else. His words are somewhat resolute. And export at the moment. In front of Mystique, he didn't feel angry. He raised his head instead, and laughed again. Blinking at Lu Yan, he said again. Like, you guys are just like Magneto when he was young, you are so rebellious and arrogant. Lu Yan rolled his eyes and didn't repeat what he said just now. I feel a little depressed in my heart. And looking at him silently. Mystique finally stopped. Following the sorrow, he sighed again. In fact, this time, besides being curious, I also want to thank you in person. Although you are the same as Magneto. But you are better than him. He was able to persuade Charles to be a dead brain. Let him change. For the cultivation method of mutant. From this point of view, you and Magneto are different again. You have done what he thought, but has not succeeded. Charles is too naive, and simply wants to make all this a pure land. Little does it know that the flowers that grow in the greenhouse can't stand the ravages of wind and rain at all. If the students have not been allowed to contact the outside world, go to fight. Sooner or later, they will suffer a big loss. Quote, Mystique sighed, talking about this. It seems to be unfounded worry. But when Lu Yan heard the news, he nodded in agreement. He is familiar with the original storyline, and naturally knows that Xavier will indeed suffer a big loss. In fact, if it hadn't been for him to change the timeline before, persuading Professor X not to look for Apocalypse in the first place. The Xavier, it is estimated that it has been blown to ruins. It's definitely, he can't explain these words clearly, he can only use his eyes to show his support for Mystique. While looking at the two people, the conversation was happily. Professor X, who has not been watching, I couldn't help but coughed again. Laughed and teased. Enough, you guys, haven't I agreed to everything? No need to mention it repeatedly, come and whip the corpse, right? Quote. Are you embarrassed to say? If it were your thoughts, you could change it sooner. Maybe Magneto won't be so stiff with you. Quote. Mystique snorted and said this. Obviously, I still feel sorry for the separation between Magneto and Professor X. As for Lu Yan at this time, he coughed, and finally couldn't help but interrupted the conversation between the two. Asked out his doubts. I want to know what they are doing this time, calling themselves over. Impossible, just to satisfy the curiosity of Mystique. If so, it would be too cheating. Lu Yuan must carefully consider any summons of Professor X in the future. After all, he is in school at the moment, not as a student. It exists as a collaborator on the X-Men side. He has no need, let alone an obligation, he has to follow Professor X's instructions in everything. And seeing his face at this time, he was somewhat impatient. Professor X and Mystique laughed, and finally did not conceal any more, and they said the biggest purpose for inviting him over on this trip. Nothing else, but want to invite Lu Yan to join the combat training. Yes, this time Mystique and the professor discussed the way forward. In order to better rescue Magneto controlled by Apocalypse, the professor finally agreed to organize his own armed forces in the school. At this time, finally, the change throws an olive branch towards Lu Yan. When Lu Yan asked himself, he naturally became excited too. Originally, I was still worrying about my control of fruitful fruits and where to get special achievements. Seeing the most people's reaction right now, I have thoughts again in my mind. I think this is a rare good opportunity. Definitely, he thought it over before speaking, but he didn't accept the request from the other party to join the organization. It's just that he is willing to participate in the training camp. This is not to prejudice the X-Men or Professor X. And it's purely his personal creed, that's it. I am used to living a lone ranger or semi-reclusive life. He didn't hide these things. When he refused, he told a lot of friends. This is foreseeable, and it will cause a sensation in Xavier School. However, fortunately, Professor X and Mystique are not overbearing people either. Lu Yan here is regarded as a non-staff personnel, successfully mixed into the training camp of the future X-Men squad. The battle that night, Lu Yan was arranged by Mystique and had another duel with Cyclops. Needless to say this time, Lu Yan, who had regained his control, won the game more easily. With this victory, his fruitful control has increased by 0.7% in Invisible. With this wave of improvement, Lu Yan suddenly became less disgusted with Cyclops. I think this buddy can become his own mobile experience package. Beat him twice if nothing happens. Rising experience is also a good thing. Definitely all this. Cyclops may not be clear. Otherwise, I was afraid that I would really vomit blood for 3 liters this time, and was fainted by Lu Yan. 2 Bully. Don't worry about beating someone, and then treat it as a sandbag for decompression. Is it okay to play twice? Listen, this TM is still human. Lu Yan is in this special training camp at the moment. Naturally, it is impossible to fight against Cyclops alone. Rather, they have had discussions with all the members of the X-Men. Except for Mystique. Most of the other people were easily suppressed by Lu Yan. As for Mystique, although this guy's ability is not offensive, but Lu Yan also had to admit, this woman who has been promoted as a hero by mutant all over the world does have her own strength. On the first day of the match, Lu Yan, who was suppressed by his own rich combat experience alone, was unable to fight back. Definitely, this suppression was only on the first day. With the second day and the third day, Lu Yan and other X-Men fought more and more times. The control of fruit ability is getting higher and higher. Mystique's suppression of him is naturally getting smaller and smaller. 10 will be reduced in one effort. In the end, the other party didn't even touch the corner of his clothes. Lu Yan's firepower has been fully fired, using 100 times the force of gravity to directly press down on the ground, unable to move. Definitely, this kind of attack, Lu Yan only performed it once. Next, the battle between Lu Yan and Mystique still chose the fight to the flesh strategy. In the later stage, Lu Yan even took the initiative to suppress his own fruit ability. The reason for this, it's not that he looked at Mystique's beautiful appearance and felt pity. Instead, I intend to learn some fighting knowledge with Mystique in this way. After all, in the development of ability, Lu Yan does not need to work hard because of the help of the system. On the contrary, there are relevant experience and means of fighting against others. It is what he needs urgently when he crosses the party. And for this knowledge, from the current Xavier school, Mystique is undoubtedly the most experienced. There is such a good teacher in front of me. Lu Yan is really stupid if he doesn't follow along. So the training camp for the next few days, Lu Yan is already the absolute number one in the team. Instead of being lazy, he has become the hardest one in the whole team. Almost all day, soaking in the training room day and night, fighting against Mystique. That crazy training attitude. The people at Xavier School who were originally only afraid of Lu Yan can't help but admire a little more. As a result, Lu Yan, who was previously known as a fighting maniac, unintentionally, the nickname has changed again. And this time it became better. Become Wu Kai. As soon as time passed, 7 days passed. 1 week later, in the special training room of Xavier School, a tall, black-haired young man with a tang sword at his waist stood silently. Next to him, there are a total of 8 original sentinels. At this moment, he stepped forward and rushed towards the former youth. 8 robots are not too slow. In the fundus of the eyes, red light flickered. The icy airframe even revealed a penetrating sense of oppression. If it is an average person, let alone 8. There was only one, attacking him at this level. I'm afraid the other party will also change color. I was scared and peed my pants. But the boy right now stood in the middle of the 8 first-generation sentinels. Feel the menacing deterrent sweeping from all sides. The young man's complexion remained unchanged. The whole person is like an old monk entering Dharma. He didn't even move his fingers. 500 steps. 300 steps. 100 steps. 50 steps. Sentinel's speed is getting faster and faster. At this time, it was accompanied by a silent voice. One by one, file-sized steel fists, like buckets, were raised aloft. Pointed at the black-haired boy on the ground. Smashed down hard. The dull wind howl, blowing the broken hair on the young man's forehead, dancing with the wind. It's also time to wait. Only then did the boy's right hand grip the handle of Tang Dao tightly. Then raise your hand. Outrageously shoot. Gravity knife big tiger. The man swept forward with a knife. In an instant, just listening to the buzzing, the entire void seemed to tremble crazily with the man's cut. And with this tremor, invisible looked like countless scourges, attacking in all directions. And the 8 first-generation sentinels who had just called at him. At this time, the figure is all standing in place. Time seems to have fallen into a static state. Then in the rear, under the shocking gaze of the spectators, 8 sentinels with steel bodies weighing several tons. This time it was fragile as paper. As the young man's sword fell, he was cut all upside down and flew out. They are all embedded in the wall of the training room next to them. The machine was completely shattered, and it was crushed into a discus by the twisted gravity. Turned into parts, crashing, scattered all over the floor. The training room, all made of alloy, is a mess at the moment. At the moment, no one is paying attention to this anymore. Everyone raised their heads at this time, but their eyes still fell on the black-haired man holding the Tang sword. In my heart, there is only shock. This was really displayed by him. The use of this ability is terrifying. Who said no? He has only been in school for a few days. I think he is really going to be the strongest mutant in our school. Xavier's students talked a lot. Standing on the subjective platform, Mystique and Professor X looked at each other. I also dared to see the surprise and exclamation in the other side's eyes. Yeah, it's really too strong. Such attack methods have long surpassed their peers. Don't talk about them. Even Professor X can't guarantee that if he was careless, he would be cut to death on the spot by this trick. What kind of monster is this brat? Mystique sighed. She traveled the world and saw a lot of great mutants. But a pervert like Lu Yan, to be honest, is indeed extremely rare. Yes, it is Lu Yan who is being discussed so much by everyone at the moment. Only Lu Yan has this qualification. As he slowly retracted the knife, there was another system prompt in Lu Yan's head. Beep, congratulations to the host for successfully defeating Sentinel, completing the achievement, and increasing the fruit control to 51.7%. The familiar tone sounded again. Turning his head again, he looked at the group of 8 first-generation Sentinels who had been completely smashed by him. Lu Yan's eyes were also filled with relief and excitement. In fact, don't talk about them, he didn't even expect to take him with him. In the past 7 days, his strength has soared to such an extent. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.